to say that I'm genuinely excited about this. I've been saying for years that our next guest, in my opinion, is perhaps the most marketable young star that our sport has to offer. He's great on camera. He's personable, charismatic. He's got a passion for drag racing that is abundantly clear. He's competed at the highest levels in a wide variety of drag racing disciplines and seemingly shocked the world in 2021 by announcing his move into Top Fuel competition. Friends, give it up. And I want a round of applause from Murder Tundra and Mike Carpenter here. Give it up for Alex Laughlin. Come on, guys. Woo, cheer, everybody.
What's cracking?
Sweet, Mike.
I'm actually a top fan. Right, Alex?
Yeah, you got your top fan badge.
Yeah, I do have a top fan
I got
badge.
a top fan badge.
Yeah.
Dude, if you literally I think if you open your freaking Facebook app, I get a notification.
Yeah. Perfect.
Seriously.
Hopefully everybody does. Yeah, check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
And I'm going to real quick, and I'm not going to derail this interview, so bear with me because I typically do. But I'm going to say this real quick. There's a funny story behind that ring. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex is a dear friend of mine, somebody I consider a real homie away from all this. Like if we all quit drag racing tomorrow, Alex and I believe, would still be friends. And after he won, lights out, he was on the cover of Drag Illustrated magazine. We're holding up the money phone, the big stack of cash with Donald Long. Great moment. He had a championship rings were created to commemorate that moment. Alex, being the kind of guy he is, gifted me one. Big moment for me. I opened the box and it's got the blue screw on there, representative of Alex's beloved C6 Corvette with the screw blower up top. Really cool moment for me. Alex, I don't know if you know this. About 3 months after that, our Drag Illustrated offices got broken into and all of my championship rings got stolen that had been gifted to me from various teams and team owners. And there were some of my prized possessions. And that
it was me. I was trying to break in to get that ring.
It did, dude. They kicked the door off the hinges, robbed us blind. They did find about $750,000 worth of fake money that I had bought for the winner's circle at the World Doorslammer Nationals. And we have them on camera finding this money and like celebrating. They're like, oh my gosh, this guy keeps money in plastic tins or in plastic tubs. It was hilarious. And they run out the door with all that fake cash and my championship rings.
They stole everything, and then they found the money, and then boom, they stopped. They didn't steal anything else in the whole office.
There was no need
to.
So it's like a security.
And then
to have that fake money, just
every little town around our town, and all the convenience stores and McDonald's. I mean, everybody was getting these hundreds, man. The cops, they couldn't even keep up with it.
I think they were genuinely mad at me, to be honest.
And this cat walks in with this one day, and like, hey man, I found this, just laying the weeds out here, Like, well, I ain't paying you for it. Give it to me, So.
Yeah, sure. But JT, long story, Murder Tundra got it back for us. So I'm glad he showed that off. Alex, I know we have limited time with you. You're headed for Indy. You've got big plans this weekend. Kind of want to dive into our first question. As someone who's done a whole lot of drag racing, Alex, with a considerable amount of success, you've won in pro stock at Indy. You've, like I just said, you've won Radial versus the World in Valdosta. You won our own World Doorslammer Nationals behind the wheel of the Caruso family Camaro a couple of years ago, and now you're taking on Top Fuel. Can you do us a little compare and contrast? Like, start with the car itself. You told me privately that you maybe hadn't given these cars or their drivers the respect or the credit they deserve, and I guess I just want to know how so.
Yeah, I've actually always said that. First off, can you hear me well?
Very well.
Okay. All right. Perfect. First off, I have always said, that there can't be much to driving a Top Fuel car because you literally just hit the gas and hang on, burp, and it's over. While that 100% is true as far as how long it lasts, I was completely wrong about what it even feels like to your body. I've drag raced literally everything except a bike and a boat, I think. And the Top Fuel car doesn't compare to anything else, especially the pro stock guys. They do always dog on it. And they say that a pro stock car is the hardest car to drive. I don't think that's true after doing both or a lot of everything or a little bit of everything. I think that it's easier to drive a pro stock car. It's harder to drive a pro stock car perfectly. That's the hardest part. I think that probably anybody can get out of a Top Fuel car that because they're going so fast already that they're able to slow everything down in their mind and process it much quicker. So since everything's happening so much slower in a pro stock car, I feel like most people would be able to hop in and make a lap. But doing it perfectly, I do feel is a long shot. So that's the hardest part. But as far as the top fuel car, man, just like the acceleration, the G-forces, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before. And that's what was the biggest shock. I spent a full season in alcohol dragster. It's the exact same car, same chassis, same process entirely, but it's just not as fast. And so I assumed going from an alcohol dragster into a top fuel car would be pretty similar. I didn't have to learn how to drive the top fuel car because it is the same process, but I did have to learn what is happening to my body and what am I experiencing, because it's just insane. Period.
Does that speak to the fact that drag racers, especially in our nitro categories, are way more athletes than maybe they're given credit for? Because I know almost every time there's ESPN does some sort of an award ceremony, or there's some major mainstream sports company or media outlet starts talking about athletes and whatnot, drivers are typically completely excluded from those conversations. And I'm just curious. I mean, we see it all the time. Someone climbs out of one of those cars huffing and puffing, and even the best, whether it's Steve Torrance or Matt Hagan, guys that are at the absolute top peak of their game, or as well as relatively fresh faces. Paul Lee, someone that we've seen the last few years making full pulls in Nitro Funny Car, he gets out of the car, and I mean, it's short for breath. Matt Hagan gets out of the car huffing and puffing, man. Do you think that makes a great argument, what you just said, that the guys and gals that drive these cars are absolutely athletes?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And while you are literally just going down the track for a matter of seconds, it is hot. You are wearing a ton of heavy equipment, safety gear and whatnot. And I personally am seatbelted into this thing so tight that I can't even take a full breath. You know, as far as trying to take a deep breath before you stage or something, that's out. I mean, my spine is literally like buckled in half because I'm pulled down so tight in that thing. And actually, in Topeka, Kansas, where we raced last, or where I last raced, one of my interviews at the top end was talking about how I grew up watching John Force. He gets out of the car, he's huffing and puffing. And I said, you know what, dude, I get it, because I mean, I don't even know if I breathe going down the racetrack, because it is the most intense thing I've ever done in my life. And so pulling off the track, you're definitely starting to think, your adrenaline's still pumping, just like, what did I just experience? And it's
one of the things that I don't think people know that I find very interesting. And I don't, this wasn't exactly my planned second question, but I want to throw this out there. The staging process. I think a lot of people believe that driving a top fuel car is similar to anything with a clutch with a clutch, where they're running that pedal, easing it in and out or whatever. I think very few people realize that a top fuel car or a nitro funny car has so much static clutch pressure that the clutch is all the way out when you light that bottom bulb. You're just holding it against the idle with the brake. I don't think people fully understand that. Could you take us through briefly, just like from backing up from the burnout and starting to pull forward, what your hands and legs are doing, what your hands and feet are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So once you've done the burnout and backed all the way up, you put it back in forward and you start creeping up. They get you close to the beams, right? They're holding you there. They look over, the other guy or the car in the other lane is ready to go. You get the thumbs up. At that point, I go ahead and start easing out on the clutch while I'm dragging the brake. I light my top bulb, clutch back in. As soon as they light their top bulb, or vice versa, that's when you let the clutch out completely. And at that point, you are just holding it by the brake handle. What I do is I actually let the clutch out, and there's a foot pad between the two pedals, the gas pedal and the clutch pedal. And I hold my foot right there on that foot pad, and you don't ever touch the clutch again all the way through the shutdown. From that point on, once you step off the clutch pedal, you're just sitting there holding it up by the brake. And as soon as the trigger drops, you stab the gas, it rips the brake handle right out of your hand, and away you go. Hang on.
I think it's a pretty incredible thing that is kind of just those little nuances I don't know are largely understood, right? People just, I think they think about pulling up to a stoplight, right? In their 4-cylinder Jeep or what have you, and easing forward, right? Because the car in front of them rolled forward or whatever. And you think about doing that with, I mean, we've seen it many times going back to the athlete conversation, that the leg strength that it takes to finesse a clutch pedal with that much static clutch pressure, as well as manhandling the car in the shutdown. We've seen a lot of drivers, especially new drivers, really struggle with these cars on the big end as you head in to get the laundry out and head into the shutdown. Can you take us through that a little bit? Just keeping the car in your lane, because that seems to be where most people have trouble, is way down there at the big end. The car starts to want to move around.
That's 100% the case, and it's so easy to get behind the car because the car, and it's not necessarily physically behind the car, but your brain is 100 feet or 200 feet behind you. It is accelerating and moving at such a fast rate of speed that once it starts drifting to the right or the left, whichever way you're trying to counter steer it, it's already gone way further than what you're imagining. In comparison to a door car, the hardest part about the run in a door car is the early side of the track. That's the part that when you let the clutch out or let off the trans brake, you might go cross-eyed or lose your marbles there for just a second. But the Top Fuel car, it's already leaving much, much harder, typically a 1/10 of a second faster or quicker than a door car already. And it pulls harder and harder and harder the entire way. So the G meter is going up as the car goes down the racetrack, where a door car, it hits the high G's early and it starts falling as you go down towards the finish line. And so that's the reason that it does get so intense further down the racetrack.
I think it's a really interesting thing that just, to your point, honestly, that I don't know that these men and women, the Alexis DeJorias, I think, especially the Leah Pruitts, especially the Brittany Forces and all these young women that managed to go out there and fight these machines down the track. It's inarguably controlled chaos, and I just have a lot of respect for them. And I get surprised that I don't see more people like yourself that are clearly athletic. J.R. Todd, clearly athletic. Matt Hagan, clearly athletic. And it makes me proud, because I think those are the type of people that I want to represent our sport in the mainstream, in the public eye. So it's a really, really cool thing. And I appreciate the details. Kind of switching gears here. And I think we're going to bring the homie in, Mike Carpenter. Is that right? Mike wants to be a part of the Doorslammer question. So I think I'm going to speak for both of us here. As dyed-in-the-wool Doorslammer guys, I have to ask, is this chapter of your career, the Pro Stock, Pro Mod chapter of your career, or Radio Verse the World, or maybe even No Prep, or like the Big Tire Outlaw stuff you did at the Streetcar Super Nationals Grudge event down here in Dallas a few months ago, is that something that you feel is behind you, man? And I guess I'm going to screw up here a little bit, but this might be a good time to interject. I got to be honest, man. I heard a little rumor that you were going to drive for Richie Stevens this weekend in Pro Stock, but the NHRA put the kibosh on that deal and didn't let it happen. So I guess maybe I answered my own question, or maybe you can elaborate.
Perfect segue there. I would say that the door car stuff at this point, for the most part, is probably behind me. I do absolutely love this Top Fuel stuff more than anything than I ever imagined. And it is what I am pursuing. Obviously, as far as funding goes, it does require a decent amount more. And so I'm really just putting all of my eggs in that basket. I was asked by Richie if I'd be interested in driving his car at the U.S. Nationals this weekend in Pro Stock, because he lives in New Orleans and they were affected by the hurricane. I told him, I do hate the circumstances of what presented the opportunity, but I said I would absolutely love to drive the car for him. I've probably ran as many races in two cars in two categories as I have in a single category. And so I've done it a ton. And I reached out to NHRA, and they do have an old dinosaur rule in the rule book that says you can't run two pro categories. I could run Top Fuel and Pro Mod, but I can't run Top Fuel and Pro Stock. I thought that was a huge bummer. But, all you can assume is that there's a reason from way back in the day. I don't know. There's got to be more to it than what we can see. That's just what you have to assume, right?
I guess I don't totally. And Mike, do you have like some insight? Because for one thing, I want to say is that they have let the Top Fuel Pro Mod thing happen, because if you remember, Khaled Belushi, did that. I believe Leah may have done that a little bit. I think when she was driving the R2B2 Top Fuel or the Fun Pro Mod, I'm not totally sure, but it has happened. But there's two parts of this. Yet another example of the Pro Mod division not getting treated with the respect, in my opinion, my belief, that they deserve. Mike, do you know something about this that maybe I don't?
I really don't. And I mean, it's probably pretty rare for it to happen at the same race. You might see guys that would do this, alternate or go back and forth from top fuel to pro mod or something like that. But to happen at the same race, I think is
What do you
is
do?
very
What is
rare.
the concern, Alex? Did they explain what the issue is necessarily?
No, I didn't get any explanation other than, it's been asked before, and if they made an exception this one time, that it would open up Pandora's box for future issues. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
There must
I'd
be
love
more
to know
to
what
it.
that is or what the issues are. Is it a scheduling thing? Is it a competitive thing where someone could compete, like a Steve Torrance or somebody could compete in all three classes and they don't want that? I mean, kind
I
of
wonder
odd,
if it has
but
something to do with like timing.
well, just
We've
like the
experienced that
schedule deal.
ourselves,
Yeah,
right? Like
that's what I mean.
we've experienced that ourselves. We had a situation at the World Door Slammer Nationals earlier this year, the CTEC World Door Slammer Nationals presented by Jegs in Orlando. An interesting situation where Erica Enders was racing pro stock, obviously competing in our headline category, but also in comp eliminator. And it was I admit that it was a bit of a dance, right? Because you did find yourself in a situation where like, okay, we got to hold things up because we need to get Erica back up here to get her ready for comp, and we can't run those cars. Or I can see how it causes a problem, but I guess my question right now, in the grand scheme of things, you've got someone like Alex Laughlin, who has a strong fan following, is really on the come up, right? Made this big move into Top Fuel, has sponsorship support, has companies like Hot Wheels following his movements and working with him frequently. It seems like it would be worth whatever is required to make this big moment possible, because it would be the talk of town.
Yeah, I think it would be a cool deal. Unfortunately, they shot it down. But you look back to just a few years ago, you had to be 18 years old to be able to compete in a pro category. That was another old dinosaur rule, and they ended up changing that for Tanner Gray. But I guess at the end of the day, I don't have the money to buy the rules.
Oh, yeah, it usually comes to that, right? But
I mean, unfortunately, I do think that sometimes those things are at play, whether we like it or not. I mean, it's the way of the world, especially here in 2021, man.
this
a
deal
checkbook
especially
can change things. I do find it interesting, especially with some of the car count issues that the NHRA has had in 2022, or excuse me, in 2021. It feels like anything we could do to get another rig in the pits, because I look at it from so many different angles. Like when I put my promoter hat on, unfortunately, I can't help but think about another tractor trailer in the pits, right? Somebody to get an autograph or to walk by and take pictures, things like that. I mean, it really adds to the event in a lot of different ways, more so than just on the racetrack. Interesting thing. Do you look back? I mean, you've had some really, really, I'm sure, fond memories of Doorslammer drag racing. It's winning all these big races, being a part of all the big events down at Donald Long's Productions in South Georgia Motorsports Park. What of that world do you think that you will miss the most, Alex?
Man, I will say the door cars had my heart for the longest time, and I will always love them, and never regret the time that I spent in them. They are difficult to drive. They're a blast to drive. It is a completely different feeling. So I can't quite say that I just absolutely love the Top Fuel stuff so much more, because it is still very different. If I did have the opportunity to hop back in a pro mod or something here in the future, I would be happy to. Absolutely.
Kind of on the same line, we talked about Stevie earlier, and we talked about it being so rare. Really, Scotty Cannon being the prime example of Doorslammer guys going to the fuel ranks. Why do you think that is so rare, that we don't see more of this crossover? So many people wanting to try something new or do it. Like in your case, we talk about your marketing partners and your sponsors. You're such a savvy marketer that you're doing it to bring more exposure to those companies. Why don't we see this happen more often? And why is it so segregated?
I think there's probably a couple of reasons. One being because everybody assumes that the nitro stuff is such a bigger deal to fund. It costs twice as much, right? I will say that isn't completely the case, because I'm doing this for not a whole lot more than what it was costing to run Pro Stock and Pro Mod. But then secondly, all of the door car guys are just huge fans of door cars.
Right.
And when you're around all of those people, they're the ones that are always like, oh, nitro sucks, and bashing it. And so I think that some people just don't ever look at considering the switch just because they're really just tied and anchored down. I hate to say in like a cultish way, but I don't know. I probably never would have tried it, to be honest, other than the reason that all of this came together and just happened.
And Scott Palmer, the guy that kind of showed you the door to the Top Fuel, he's kind of a pro mod Top Fuel crossover guy as well. So it's very interesting to think about, really.
From a business standpoint, Alex, I'm curious, and we always love talking about the business of racing here on the Wes Buck Show. I'm curious, like, we've talked about all your various marketing partners. I mean, I believe right now, and there's a lot of brands you represent. I'm curious how companies like Laughlin, Hot Wheels, Powerbolt, Built, Tyga, how have they reacted to this ascension to Top Fuel racing? Because I know you've told me before that many of these brands you represent don't necessarily care. They're not overtly concerned with what type of racing that you're doing. They see you as an ambassador for them. And as long as you're racing, as long as you're competing at a high level, they don't totally care where you go race. But I can't imagine racing Top Fuel and all this additional television exposure and all this additional media. I can't imagine it's not being well received.
It doesn't hurt anything, for sure. I will say that. And it started out just on paper. My contracts have said pro stock and or pro mod. And the only pushback I got was from one sponsor, is because on paper, and you have to understand, working with some of these huge corporate companies, when it gets down to legal and the paperwork, it just has to be what it says that it is. And whenever I did make the switch going into Denver, they did make an exception. But they kind of started the weekend out with like, we're not really going to post much about this Top Fuel car because it isn't what it's supposed to be. And by the end of the weekend, they were posting it all over their own social media and they loved it. It's been huge. And just days after, I got the amendment for the contract that it's got plus Top Fuel.
That's hilarious, man. I'm not really surprised at all. And I was always proud, and I loved that story you told me about. At the time, you were working with a really, really big, like Fortune 500, very, very impactful company. This was right before COVID that I thought, oh my gosh, if this happens, it's going to be so big for drag racing. But I was so proud of you and of the situation where they didn't really care what kind of car you drove. They looked at you as an ambassador for their brand, and they saw value in the motorsports and drag racing market, which was, I think, a feather in the cap of drag racing. But I can't imagine that it hurts, as you said, to be participating at the highest level of our sport. There's a couple of things that I want to touch on just briefly before we cut you loose, man. You have really performed well. I know you're hard on yourself and you put a bunch of pressure on yourself to perform at a high level, and cutting a light in these cars is a challenge for anybody. We see the best in the business go 90 or 100 at times. You have demonstrated, though, the performance to be in the thick of things. How proud are you of Scott Palmer Racing, Scott himself, that whole crew, an incredible group of guys, because they're really giving you a race car that you can go rounds in?
Yeah, they are. And they're awesome people. Just to add on top of it, every single person there, every crew member, anybody that's under the SPR tent there, they're just so happy to be there. Nobody complains about anything. It's all positivity. And the vibe is so good that a lot of success, that's what it comes to. The teams that you look around, and not saying specifically Top Fuel or Nitro in general, but any team, the people that are out there that even do have the horsepower, that do run good, they don't all love each other. They don't get along. They aren't all super happy to be there. And with that bitterness really pours over into performance. I owe Scott everything from allowing me the opportunity to license in his car, and for him to get out of his own car in Denver and let me run it, to the direction that we're heading now. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a place that I'm at now that I never thought was achievable. It's not a place that I ever thought that I could reach. And to Scott and his team, I owe it all to them, for sure.
there was a happening that I think is important to mention that I talked to Scott Palmer about. And Scott and I don't mean to go all Stephen A. Smith on ESPN here and say everybody's my best friend, but I go way back with Scott Palmer. I've known this dude since like 2001 or 2. So I've known him a really long time. And I was talking to Scott about your licensing process. And I think it's fairly well known at this point that you were intending to go out to the NHRA Mile High Nationals in Denver, of course, sponsored by Dodge and SRT, two of big longtime supporters of Drag Illustrated. So I want to make sure they know we appreciate them. But you were headed out there to run Pro Mod. The Elite Motorsports camp decides that they're going to park the Pro Mod cars for the time being. You need a ride. You reach out to Scott Palmer. And I think the story here is the licensing process. Scott tells me this story that he goes, hey, man, most young drivers, most guys that are new to this, they're going to want to go license at Vegas. They're going to want to go to the Strip at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. They're going to want to go to ZMAX or Indy, one of these big tracks, wide tracks, lots of shutdown. I told him, Alex, I'm sorry, but the car is already set up. The truck and trailer's out. I've got a match race this weekend at Wichita International Raceway in Kansas, which for the hardcores on here today, this is a nitty gritty little drag strip in Kansas, an awesome place I've been to many times with my family, but not exactly the place that you want to earn your license in a Top Fuel dragster. Can you take me through that whole scenario? Because I think we're going to create some fans of Alex Laughlin here real quick, because not very many people would be willing to get their license at a place like that.
Well, you started it out with saying that most people would want to go to a Vegas or a Charlotte, the long shutdown wide tracks. I 100% would still fall into that category. But then you followed up with the willingness, and that's what it came down to. I had to do whatever I had to do. And yeah, I'll admit, it made the butterflies a little bit bigger for sure. Yeah, leading up the night before, I was a little nervous for sure. The shutdown there, it is a little bumpy, especially for a car with no suspension, right? The suspension is literally in the chassis. So you're like going through the shutdown area and you feel the belly of that dragster just scraping the ground. It's not a place for a Top Fuel car to run for sure. But at the end of the day, Scott told me, he's like, I'm not worried about you running this car. I completely have faith in you. And that's all I could base it off of. He said that he had talked to Frankie Taylor, and if Frankie has the things to say about my driving, then it's good for him. And that's all I could lean on is like, man, I don't know what's up with this car. I don't know what it's about. I don't know anything about it. So I just have to trust Scott. Like if he's good with me driving it and thinks I can do it, then God, I hope I can.
I clearly, according to Scott, you answered the bell and you carried that momentum over to the Mile High Nationals. You qualified your first time out. You were there. We had some issues, I guess, in the first round of eliminations, but those things are going to happen. Drag racing is going to be drag racing, man. But you delivered for your sponsors. You were there. You put on a show. You did the burnouts. We got the pictures, the incredible wide angle shots of those glorious stands at Bandamere Speedway. Shout out to my buddy Sporty Bandamere celebrating his birthday today. But you got everything you needed. You did what you had to do, and you're headed to Indy, man. How confident are you headed into this weekend? How excited are you to go be a part of the biggest drag race in the world in the most talked about, the most celebrated categories our sport has ever known?
Yeah, I mean, it's our Super Bowl. It's the biggest one that we've got, and to be racing it in the pinnacle category of NHRA drag racing, it's like
pinch me moment.
Yeah, I'm kind of a softie sometimes. My eyes are kind of getting leaky. But yeah, it's crazy. It really is. It's absolutely insane. I was lucky enough to win the race in Pro Stock back in 2019, and to be able to show up and run Top Fuel. Something's happening to my voice also. It's really weird.
Dude, I got goosebumps and chills. I'm a big softie. I appreciate it, Alex. And I appreciate that honesty and candid commentary here on this show, because that's what we're here for, is unfiltered conversations about the sport of drag racing, the sport we all love, man. And we ask all the time for people to show us that you mean it. And right here today, man, you're doing exactly that. I appreciate it, brother.
I do for sure. And man, it may be 7 days away. It may be 7 years away, but one of these days I plan to hold a Top Fuel Wally. Where's my hand right there? So it'd be cool to do it in Indy. That's for sure. But
Well, we cannot wait to see this deal unfold, man. Alex, thank you so much for the time. We look forward to seeing you in a couple of days. Please be safe. Best of luck to you, man. And we'll see you at the NHRA U.S. National.